Now, I think some of the things that people, when they're describing the quality of a flashlight, and they talk about these intangibles, these things that you can't really describe, but you just get the sensation when you feel it in your hand. And I think I have an explanation for some of those. For example, I talked earlier about the Surefire and how thick the walls are. When you pick up the Surefire body, I mean, it's a very substantial piece of aluminum. This piece alone probably weighs more than the entire L2P, not including the drop-in, of course, just because of the extra material, because it has a thinner wall. But when you bore a Surefire out to 18 millimeters, you lose some of that wall thickness, and it starts to feel a lot more just like the Solar Force does. Now, some of the other differences that you'll note, I take the tail cap back off the Solar Force here so you can see. There's a single O-ring on the tail, where the Surefire actually has dual O-rings. It's got 1 and 2 O-rings, and the O-rings are a little bit bigger diameter, and you notice that when you screw on the tail cap to the Surefire, it's got a little bit more resistance because you're kind of fighting that thicker, maybe a little bit denser O-ring, and then you hit the second O-ring, and once that engages, it actually does become a little bit harder to screw on the tail cap. Yeah, it does probably provide a better seal, though, like I said, I've had this Solar Force 60 feet underwater with no issues. So how much more water resistance do you need? I don't know. That's up to you. Same thing, really good, quality O-ring in the head here. The anodizing, again, is very consistent. This is a situation where we've got it kind of switched up on our heads. We've got the more expensive Surefire light with the Type 2 anodizing, the less expensive Solar Force with the Type 3 anodizing. But again, I've never noticed a functional difference between them. None of these lights are really nicked up, and they've all been dropped and used. I mean, none of these are shelf queens. But that's something that if you just want to know that you have the Type 3 anodizing in your light, go to Overready or have somebody re-anodize it or look somewhere else. The difference in the knurling on the lights, the kind of machined feel here, and we're getting way, way smaller than my poor little camera can pick up, but it's a little bit more aggressive on the Surefire. It's just a larger diamond cut, so that I think they're a little bit deeper. There's fewer of them, so you get more of a textured surface, where on the Solar Force, they're so small. The diamonds, I mean, they're very consistent. It's very good machining, but they're so small that it almost feels smooth rather than as textured. But again, I don't struggle with gripping the Solar Force at all. I realize I'm leaving the Malkoff out here. The Malkoff has pretty good wall thickness. Of course, when you put a Malkoff module in a light, which, I mean, the only drop-in modules that fit the Malkoff are the Malkoff modules, but when you put one of those in there, it adds to the overall weight of the light because it's solid brass, so it definitely feels a lot heavier. But without that drop-in and just looking at the difference between the bodies side by side, again, pretty good anodizing. I will say about the Malkoffs, and this is, there are advantages and disadvantages to a smaller company like the Malkoff Flashlight Company, which is run by Gene and his wife, and I think they have some people working for them, but they're not a Surefire, they're not a Solar Force, they're not cranking out thousands and thousands of lights a day. There are advantages and disadvantages from ordering a flashlight from a smaller flashlight maker. The disadvantage is that there's a little bit more inconsistency among the lights. I have ordered these MD2s before, or MD3s, the 3-cell version, and noticed that the anodizing on the head would be a different color than the anodizing on the body, or that the anodizing on the actual body will have light spots, kind of inconsistencies. Now, how much does that matter? Again, I don't really know, but the situation came up recently where I wanted to get one of these for my father. He's retiring after 35 years. I want to send my dad a flashlight. I want to send him a Malkoff. So I had to make sure when I requested in the order, in the notes, that they try to send me a body piece and a head piece that matched. Because while it doesn't bother me, somebody getting a first flashlight as a gift, or if you're new to flashlights and you want something that looks like a precision machined, very consistent piece, and it arrives and the anodizing doesn't match, I mean, that can bother you. That's the disadvantage. Now here's the advantage to ordering from a smaller company like the Malkoff. I placed that order with that special request, and when I got my flashlight, when it arrived with a handwritten note from Kathy Malkoff saying, hey, tell your dad we said congratulations on 35 years. We picked out the light that had the best possible match that we could find. Enjoy. You just don't get handwritten notes from Surefire or Solar Force or a lot of other companies when you order them, so that's really cool. And that's something to consider in the purchase of all these lights, and any light really is, what does the warranty look like, what does the customer service look like. so many of these lights have been sold, and so many people have good and bad customer service experiences. Again, you can read all over the internet, almost ad nauseum, about various companies. And I would recommend you do that. If you're going to invest the money in a light like this, go ahead and take the time to do the research and figure out what's important to you. The G2, I don't know if I would recommend a G2 as a first light, kind of just because the benchmark against which all these other lights are compared, again, is this original aluminum Surefire, and it has a bit of a different feel. It feels more like a machine tool than the plastic G2. The G2 has its place. They're lighter. You can bang them around. They don't show the scuffing, because it's all just plastic. There's no coating on it. So if you do scuff it or chip it, it's the same color underneath. You don't get it like where you get bare metal spots that show once you scratch your anodizing. But the G2 just overall doesn't feel as quality. And I think if you're starting out and you want a P60 light, and especially if you want to put a high output drop in it, that's something I should mention too, that the drop in I have in here right now is actually intentionally a low output drop in. It's a Malkov LLL version, ultra low. And the reason for that is you don't have, as I talked about earlier, you don't have the aluminum body to serve as the heat sink, or to serve as to kind of transmit the heat away from the head and so that it can dissipate. You just have this plastic, which is actually a pretty good thermal insulator. So you don't want to run a really high output module in here that gets really, really hot, because you may not be able to dissipate all that heat away. And you could end up damaging the light, damaging the drop-in, or something like that. And I think, there's people who are very, very strict about that, who won't run anything but low output drop-ins in these. I disagree. I think you can get away with running a regular Malkov M61 or a regular Nailbender XPG in here. I don't know that I would run an overdriven XML, drop-in pulling 3 amps making 700 lumens, because, yeah, you get a lot of heat built up, and you want to try to make sure you vent that off as best as possible. But you will notice that if you're looking for a Surefire specifically for whatever reason, and you want to get a Surefire, the G2s are actually cheaper. And they're cheaper because, they're a cast-poured piece of plastic rather than a machined piece of aluminum. They're cheaper to make. One thing I'll note is that the retaining ring on the bezel ring here, is also plastic. That surprised me when I first got my first ever G2, to see that this ring was plastic. I thought that you'd want the piece that engaged the threads inside the head here to be metal, and a lot of people, you've seen these crenellated bezels like this. People use them for striking things. You assume that you want this piece out here to be harder. Now, you don't have to settle for that bezel. You can of course swap it out, because the bezels on all these things are interchangeable. And actually, I think it was the 9P head I had here. Yeah, this is not the stock bezel ring on this 9P. This is a stainless steel bezel ring, which is even a little bit harder than the aluminum that I got from Overready. And you can get them other places. You can get them, different thicknesses or with the crenellations if you want them, but it'll screw right in there as a replacement. And I think it adds a little bit more kind of gutsy feeling to this plastic light. The tail cap switch, the Z41 in general, I don't like the feel as much. The way that it engages, it has a little plate in there. When you push down the switch, you kind of feel the whole thing move, but you don't get that good action like you do on a clicky, where it's kind of springy. So, the Z41, you get the same thing when you get the G versions, these lights, the plastic versions, but you've got the added factor of plastic threads on a plastic light, so you've got a little extra play in there, and, it just doesn't feel like a tool, I guess. I've talked about that too much now. Size comparison, now that I've disassembled all these, it's it's tougher to see what the sizes are like. The smallest of the standard P60 compatible lights is the Malkov of the ones I have. You'll notice that the Malkov has this kind of flange around the tail cap that allows it to tail stand. That's nice if you want to turn the light on and let it light up the room. You can't do that with the kind of more tactical tail switch that sticks out. But even with that flange, it's still as short or a little bit shorter than the G2 here. And I don't have a 6P, but I suspect it would be a little bit shorter than the 6P. And then it's definitely shorter than the Solar Force. The Solar Force has the flange, it does tail stand, but overall it's a little bit longer than the other two lights. I saw lots of videos, lots of reviews, lots of pictures before I purchased my first ever P60 light a long time ago, and I was surprised when it showed up actually how small it was. And I think something that I wish I had seen earlier, and I'll show you now, is a comparison between one of these lights and your little mag light 2AA. A 2AA mag light is tiny. You don't think about, how small it is, but people keep them in their backpacks, keep them in their pockets, and it's a little bit longer, obviously, because the longer length of AA cell. But even the diameter of the head and the body is not too much bigger. Overall, I mean, this fits pretty well in your hand. This is what I would consider an EDC-able light. Now, I primarily EDC myself single-cell lights that are even smaller than this, just because I find that I use them more if it's even smaller. But it's something that's going into a backpack, or it's going to fit into a cargo pocket, or a bug-out bag or something. This is definitely a very, very small light, and I think you'll be surprised how small it is when it shows up. Across the board, I would recommend any of these lights. There are others out there. This is not exhaustive. There are other P60 compatible lights. I can't think of them off the top of my head right now. The problem is when you start to get outside of Surefire or a Surefire clone like a Solar Force, you get a little bit of a difference in diameters and tolerances, and maybe your drop-ins won't fit exactly right. So you have that to worry about. But just do your reading online. There's plenty of other reviews out there that talk about the various lights. And in general, it's a great format for your first light if you're considering something that is expandable. In other words, you could spend a lot more money than you could on some of these to get the newest light with the newest bend emitter with multiple switches and multiple modes, but then in 3 months when the newest LED comes out, or the newest bin of the LED comes out, all of a sudden yours is out of date. Whereas with these modules, you can constantly update the drop-ins. You can get these drop-ins that are using the newest LEDs because they're easy to make, and they're just swap-in replacements without having to repurchase the entire light. There's also a lot of guys that do a lot of cool things. A lot of guys put multiple emitters, 2 or 3 different LEDs in these drop-ins. You're getting multiple LEDs. They get very, very bright. There's some with good optics on them for certain focusing, for good throw. There are kits you can buy that you can screw that are made to screw onto the tips of these to give you kind of an aspheric optic on here for better throw. And they're designed specifically for the P60 style head with that specific inner diameter and bezel. So you have a lot more options when you go with a light like this. If the 18650 rechargeable is desirable to you, if you want to be able to run that rechargeable light, of course you'll need to look at one of them that's made for an 18mm light, or that can be bored as such, and that adds a little bit to your overall cost if you have to have the light board. But for some it's worth it to kind of have that guilt-free lumens, we call it, not to have to put primary batteries in it all the time. But anyway, there it is. 18650-ish compatible P60 lights. I'm going to enable comments in this video, but I'm also going to put the link to my Reddit submission to the actual post in the subreddit so that you guys can go back and comment there, and I fully anticipate that most of the conversation will take place there. So this has been the first in, as I said earlier, what will hopefully be a series of reviews. If you've read my posts on Reddit, and specifically in the subreddit, you know that I'm generally pretty long-winded when I type. I'm also long-winded when I write. So if you've made it all the way through this video, thank you very much for watching. And if you have any questions, of course, please post them in the comments or post in the subreddit thread that will correspond to this video. Thank you very much.